Hello everybody, my name is Logan Wilson. I'm a senior mechanical engineer here at the Herff College of Engineering, University of Memphis. I'm going to be talking about communications in engineering. So the first thing is, what is communication? So I started with just a basic definition from the dictionary, and it says a process by which information is exchanged between individuals through a common system of symbols, signs, or behaviors. So basically what you do every day with your friends and family. So think about what you do. There are verbal communications, so that's the oral type of communication, just casual conversations. Written messages, may not be a letter now, but it could be a text message. That's a form of a written message. And of course, nonverbal actions such as, waving hello to somebody. So there are lots of different types of communications. But how do we associate that with communication in engineering? Well, it's largely the same thing, but it's just extrapolated to a more professional and proper level. So engineering communication can include project reporting and presentations, technical report writing, professional marketing, email composition, strategic proposals, research and analysis. So let me go back real quick. You see that there's a nice mix of written skills and oral skills that you would need to be able to accomplish most of those things. So an email composition would be focused on your written skills, while a project report and presentation will require both written and oral skills to get your point across. So those are just a couple examples of the types of communications that you would be doing as an engineer. So I already have some personal experience with engineering communications. So I've gained these experiences through just being a student here at the University of Memphis, being an engineering ambassador and an area coordinator, and then through my internship. So some of my experiences include technical report writing. Of course, that requires a lot of written skills, written communication skills through my internship. I've done public speaking to prospective students and marketing to them to try to get them to the Herff College of Engineering as their homeschool. And I've done networking through the Dean's Leadership class, and then also just learning proper emailing etiquette for when I'm discussing things with a professor. So why are these effective communication skills important to engineers? Why do we need them? Well, that's because we do a lot more than just math and science. Even though that's ultimately what we've been doing the past 4 years here at school, is just learning the theories and the technicalities of engineering, we have to be able to effectively communicate. And the best way for me to show why is to show a couple of hypothetical scenarios, ones that I've always been told. So the first example, 2 candidates, equal GPA and equal experience, both going for the same job. But at that interview, one is kind of timid and not very confident in what he or she is saying, and the other one is very confident and professional and is really attacking that open position. Obviously, we all know who's going to get that job. The next one is you're doing research, you have an amazing discovery, but you have to put a presentation together to get more funding and to get that discovery, get the ball rolling, and be able to do more research on that. But let's say you don't have the proper skills to, 1, write an effective presentation, and 2, communicate that presentation effectively so it never gets the ball rolling, and ultimately your research doesn't take off despite you having made such an important discovery. And lastly, your job is offering a promotion. And much like the first scenario we looked at, it's between you and another worker who's been there just as long as you have, done just as much work, but maybe one candidate or the other has been more vocal and has communicated more effectively, therefore he or she stands out more to the boss. That's the one that's going to get the promotion. So ultimately, it is crucial to learn how to write and speak effectively in the engineering world, almost just as crucial as learning all of the technicalities that we've been learning throughout our schooling. However, that's just my experience. Those are just my takes, but I want to show you a couple sources that have backed up what I'm telling you. So the first one is the Engineering Management Institute, and their article is Why Communication for Engineers is So Important. So think of the game telephone that you played as a kid. If you don't produce information properly, it will not be received properly. So somebody came up with a phrase at the beginning, and then you whisper it all the way down the line, and then the last person in the line says what the phrase is, and it's almost always incorrect. That same thing can happen in the workplace. If you don't communicate what you're trying to, the point you're trying to get across effectively, it's also not going to be received effectively. So those poorly delivered messages can lead to misunderstandings and frustrations. The Management Institute also was able to give out a couple clear keys to communication. So one is proper speech, be clear and concise, get to the point. Listening, and I love this phrase, what you'd like to say should be second to understanding, meaning understand first, speak second. Be consistent with your communication and how you want to approach whatever your vision is. Be patient, give others time to understand what you're saying and to really learn, because that was the second point, learn first, understand, and then speak. So you got to be patient with them. And then follow up. Following up confirms what you've listened to, and it confirms that you've heard them, taken it to heart, and you're going to go and implement it. Another source that I pulled from is IEEE, Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineering, and their article was Why Communication Skills Are Critical to Engineers. They also have a couple key takeaways and a couple scenarios that I pulled from, but I want to focus on their communication skills every engineer should possess. Public speaking, learn to engage with your audience, because if you can't engage with your audience, everybody's going to fall asleep or just tone you out. Documentation and writing is equally important to be able to write effectively, because you may not always be giving a presentation. You may need to send what you've been working on to your boss, and that has to be done in a report that they can flip through and read. So if your report writing is not up to par, they're not going to approve the project you've been working on. And lastly is speaking with authority. You have to be able to balance effectively being a plain-spoken and knowledgeable on your subject matter without being dull or sound like you're preaching at your audience. So the next thing that we're going to get into is, if you're still not convinced based on the sources that I provided, I actually interviewed 2 different engineers that I'm close with. Now I'm about to introduce them to you. And the way I interviewed them, I sent them a Word document with some questions about engineering communication, and they were able to send those back to me, and we got a lot of good feedback from that. So the first engineer I'm going to introduce to you is Mr. Andre Mello. He is the current Vice President and Principal Engineer for Principled Engineering Consultants, which is where I'm currently an intern for right now. And the second engineer on our panel is Mr. Jamie Smith. He is the Executive Vice President and Global Head of Sales of Viam Incorporated. So the way I'm going to break this down is I'm going to put their direct quotes and how they answered each of these questions on here, but I'm going to kind of describe what they're actually ultimately trying to say. So the first question is, what types of communication do you produce on the job? So at Principled Engineering Consultants, we produce technical cause and origin reports that go off to attorneys, and they're ultimately used to settle property dispute cases or insurance claims. So we do a lot of forensic engineering there, but it's important that our technical reports are being able to communicate the technicalities to a non-technical audience. And then Mr. Jamie Smith communicates how they do a lot of CAD drawings. I know that we've taken a CAD class here at the Harvard College of Engineering, so they have to take those drawings, which I included a CAD drawing on the slide, and they have to be able to market those effectively. Like I said, he's head of sales, so they have to market those effectively to all of their buyers, because they design some of the floor mats for most of your automotive. So he does a lot of different R&D, CAD drawings, and then marketing presentations. What technology do you use related to communication in the workspace? I can say confidently that any business is going to use Microsoft Office, and that includes Word, PowerPoint, Excel, Teams, so on and so forth. And of course, they both mentioned here recently the influx of using Zoom, of course, due to COVID. They both mention, well, Andre doesn't mention Dropbox, but I know we use Dropbox, and Jamie Smith does include Dropbox. So there are a lot of different programs that you can use to effectively communicate within the workplace. What changes in communication styles, activities, and technologies have you seen over time? So Andre talks about working through pandemics, so that his is a more recent example that we can all relate to, of course, using Zoom. And Jamie talks about more older example about the predecessor to using PowerPoint and how we would have to use transparencies. So it's very cool to show that gap of how we're going to have to be able to be flexible in our communication skills, because you never know, when something like COVID may strike. And Jamie shows that you have to be able to adapt to growing technologies to be able to stay up to date and be able to communicate effectively in your work. How much time on average each workday do you spend on communication? Andre says about 80%, which I can agree with. We spend most of the day technical report writing. And Jamie says if you're including emails, about 2 to 4 hours. So a large chunk of your day, even though you're an engineer, is going to be spent communicating in some form of fashion. Do you have principles that guide your writing and communicating? And they both confidently say yes. Andre shows the example of how we are writing technical reports, but we can't use too much technical jargon or we're going to lose our audience. So a big thing about communicating is you got to know your audience. So if you're using too many technical words, they're not going to be able to understand what you're writing. And Mr. Smith says that yes, he does have principles that guides his writing and communicating, and he goes along the lines of, first impressions matter, how you handle yourself, how you speak. Do you ramble on or do you get to the point? Are you making a good impression? Are you delivering what you're saying effectively? So they both definitely have principles that guide their communications. On a scale of 1 to 10, how important is it that new engineers know how to effectively communicate through writing and speaking? Andre says 10, Jamie says 11, average of 10.5, so obviously it's extremely crucial. What is one tip regarding communications that you would give a brand new engineer? And these are very important that I think everybody should take to heart. Andre says less is more, communicate concisely. And that's what I mentioned earlier, be able to get to the point, be concise, but also make sure you're covering all the topics that you need to be covered. Because if you ramble on and on, you're going to lose your audience. And Jamie says double check your work. We've been taught to double check our math equations before we turn them in. Should be no different with when you're writing something. So just a quick recap of everything. Communication involves both written and oral skills, and both of them are just as crucial, if not more crucial, to your profession as your technical skills are. Good communication practices involves being clear and concise while balancing being a proper and professional display of your intended message. And finally, the most important, communication skills secure your jobs and get your promotions. So thank you for listening to me about communications. I hope you've learned something. If you want to learn more, there's tons of articles and sources out there to really become an effective communicator. So thank you again for listening. And again, thank you to Andre Mello and Jamie Smith for allowing me to interview them. Thank you.